Welcome back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. We've got a really special show that I was super excited to record today. Michael Kirby, who is our guest and who you will meet, and I worked for a number of months leading into this big trip. And as you probably guessed by the title, it was a trip to Everest. And I knew kind of as he was getting ready to go and leave for the actual trip after months of us working together, I thought, depending on how this goes, either if he summits or he doesn't summit, his story is so great that it would be awesome to have him on to a podcast. And so he went on his trip. He's now back home. And I'll let you hear, the bulk of his story through our podcast and through our interview, but he graciously agreed to come on and share that. So this is the outcome of that, and I hope that you guys enjoy it. We talk everything from, starting from literally ground zero, challenges that came up throughout preparing for this, and like a theme you've seen from a lot of guests on here, those challenges not, being allowed to be something that prevented him from moving forward towards his dream, and, how he overcame those obstacles. And then obviously just a report from the trip itself in terms of being on Everest, and some takeaways from him. So really appreciate him joining us. Can't wait to give this to you guys. I hope that you enjoy it as much as I did hearing it. And as always, if you have any questions, you can send those to us. Without further ado, here is Michael Kirby and I talking about his trip to Everest. I think a great place to start is just an introduction of yourself, kind of who you are and what it is that you do on your normal day-to-day life, what it is that you like to do for hobbies, and then we can kind of obviously dive into the story.
Well, I live in Newfoundland, Canada. We're a small island on the very, very east coast. We're the most easterly point in North America. For work, I'm self-employed. I own seniors retirement homes. It's a bit of a family business. We've grown over the last 20 years or so. So that keeps me busy on a daily basis. I was an athlete growing up. Soccer was my sport of choice. I actually went to high school in Florida, down in the U.S. I played for a soccer academy down there, so I was at a pretty high level of soccer right up until probably 2002 or 2003 is when I finally retired from soccer. I'm 46 years old, and yeah, I guess that's my background.
It's great. Now, one thing, and I only know this because of kind of the work that we've done, but obviously the topic we're going to cover is about this trip to the biggest mountain in the world. But I know just from our history that your story starts kind of way before that, and you found yourself in a position where you may not even felt like you could climb stairs, much less Everest. So I think a good place to even begin there would be kind of talk about where that was, what the impetus for change was, and what kind of got you interested in pursuing some of this.
Sure, absolutely. So, well, as I mentioned, I was a soccer player growing up, and at that time, the idea of weight loss or being overweight or whatnot was never even in my ballpark. I never thought of it whatsoever because I was training 7 days a week, and I never really thought of it. To be honest, I could eat whatever I wanted to eat, and I never gained a pound. But in 2001, I blew out my knee playing for the local university soccer team, and that was really the turning point on the weight loss aspect, I guess. So when I blew up my knee, I tried probably for another 3 years to come back from that injury, and I was never successful. The year or so I took off after I blew out the knee, I gained a considerable amount of weight. Once or twice I was able to put the effort in and lose some of it again, but I was never able to get back to the point of playing at a competitive level. And after probably 3 years of trying, I just stopped. I gave up soccer altogether. And at that point, I continued to eat like I did when I was younger, but without the training aspect of it, I started to put on weight pretty quick. During my playing days, in my peak, I was probably about a 185. And not long before I decided to start this journey for Mount Everest, I was almost 300 pounds. Just a touch under 300, I think was the biggest I ever weighed. Um, During the years, I tried multiple times to make an effort to, I picked up, say, powerlifting. I tried powerlifting for a few years. I needed something competitive in my life. After the soccer was gone, and then once my knee wouldn't allow me to play soccer anymore, I tried different things to replace that competitive nature or a competitive spirit. And I tried powerlifting, and I did that for a few years, but I never lost any weight. I kind of more so bulked up and got bigger, and I wasn't really happy with myself at that point either. I didn't really feel very good. So yeah, like I said, when I finally made the decision that I was going to try and conquer Mount Everest, or not conquer Mount Everest, or try and climb Mount Everest, I should say, I was just under 300 pounds.
So looking back at that, because you're like a lot of people in the sense of you have on your own in some form or fashion tried to get the weight off and either were successful to a margin, but maybe not all the way that you wanted it to be at, and or you had no success at all. So if you look back at that and you were trying to powerlift and you were trying to do all of those things, what do you feel like your greatest or your most significant point of confusion was on why the weight loss wasn't happening in spite of the lifting and the effort and the attempt?
During the powerlifting, I guess in the beginning, before I was doing powerlifting, I just joined this gym, and they had these weight loss programs. They called it, was it Ripped in 42? And it was these extreme diets, and you were working out several days a week, and there was all of a big competition to see who could lose the most weight or whatnot. And I just wasn't losing any weight. I could do all the exercises. I was incredibly strong in the gym. I could do squat and bench press and do great numbers, but I couldn't lose weight. I just, I did, I guess it took me for a very long time until I finally realized about calories in and calories out, and the fact that there was no amount of training at this point in my life that I was going to be able to do, that I was going to be able to out train the bad diet. I wasn't, it took me a long time to realize that until I changed the food. Doesn't matter what I was doing in the gym, it just, weight would not change.
And so then you started making some change, like just based off of that premise, calories in, calories out. And I always, to be honest with you, I always struggle with this part because it seems like an infomercial and that's not the goal. But we did work together and you did reach out at one point. And so it is relevant to some degree, just that point that you felt like your efforts, you had gotten as far as you can with the knowledge that you had gotten. How, talk a little bit about what you did do on your own, even prior to reaching out.
Yeah, sure. So when I first started, it was 2019 when I made the decision that I was going to attempt to climb Mount Everest. And at that time, I say an awful lot these days, but I never for a million years thought I was actually going to climb Mount Everest. I was like, I said, let's go. And I'd probably be like, I'll work out for 2, 3 months. I'll lose 3 or 4 pounds and I'll feel a little bit better. And then I'll move on to something else. So, but at the time, I started trying to research mountaineering training and whatnot. And I then hired Rowan from Summit Strength. And he gave me a pretty detailed workout plan. But again, the weight wasn't coming off in the beginning. It wasn't until the very first catalyst for me to see weight loss was when I read Lane Norton's book, Fat Loss Forever. And that was when I was introduced to the concept of the calories in, calories out. Now, I had had some prior experience in that realm because my wife had gone through, she did a physique competition years before, and she had done the tracking and the macros. And so I was aware of the concept, but I guess it never really sunk into me that that was what I would have to do. So once I read the book and I started at that point tracking my meals, that was when I first started seeing the success. Then I had already been training for 6 months, 6 months, I would guess, with Rowan, with seeing no weight loss whatsoever. But the second I started to put those numbers into my Fitness Pal, things immediately started to see. I immediately started to see the change. As soon as I picked a number, at that time again, I was kind of just running off of. Did a whole bunch of calorie calculators I found on Google, and I picked a number, but I immediately started to see progress. And then the more I dug into the concept and the more I learned about it, the more success I started to have.
And so you took that concept, and Lane is a pretty balanced guy. Like he's got a pretty good perspective on it. He's not too dogmatic in his approach. Teaches science. He's pretty solid source. You took that approach. You went from 300 down to, what'd you go down to?
I started with rowing in 2019, and my first mountaineering course I did was on Mount Rainier. It was in June of 2022. I tried to go the year before that, but with the travel restrictions at COVID at that time, didn't allow me to travel. So I had been started in late 2019. When I left to go to Mount Rainier in June of 2022, I had hit 225.
So you lose 75 pounds kind of doing this. What kind of initially prompted you then to reach out, early, I guess it was late last year?
Yeah. When I first reached out to you, I had kind of plateaued. So my goal was always weight wise, I always had a goal in my mind of 215. That was always the number I wanted to hit. And just before Rainier, I hit 225. So I was close. But after that, after I came back from Rainier, I immediately started training again for my first trip to Nepal, which was called Three Peaks. And before I left for that one, I was up to 230. And then my next trip to Nepal was in September of 2024. And again, I couldn't get below 230. So when I reached out to you, I had plateaued at that point, and I was about to enter my final phase of training to head to Everest. So I knew I had 6 months left, and I was like, basically, whatever I can possibly do to help me get ready for Everest, I was willing to do. Also, a catalyst for me reaching out to you was the calories I was eating were great, but I was having issues with nutrition on the mountain, on the expedition. When I was on Manaslu in 2024, I had some issues there. I wasn't eating enough, a loss of appetite. My fueling wasn't done. I hadn't done any proper work on what I needed to eat while I was exercising. I was fine with. I'm the type of person that can eat the same meal 5 nights a week and not bother me whatsoever. So I found 2 or 3 meals and I just recycled them over and over and over and over and over. But I didn't put any extra work into how I fueled for the training and how I fueled for on the mountain. And that was a big catalyst for me reaching out to you.
So knowing the work that we did, which again, like I always say that you guys are the ones doing the heavy lifting, right? It's one thing to sit on this side of the computer and create stuff, and to know that people are investing 7 days a week, most of the waking hours doing this. It's not lost on me that the work and the accolade belongs to the person. So if you look back at what kind of had you plateaued with all the work that you'd already done, which frankly is quite remarkable that you did that much work on your own, and you know now what it was that you and I worked on in the months leading up to your big trip, what do you feel like had you stuck? What do you feel like was preventing you from getting beyond that 230 mark or that 225 mark without it coming at the expense of energy to train, protein to recover, etc.?
I think I was a little high. To be honest, actually, no, I shouldn't say I was a little high. If anything, I was almost a little low on my calorie numbers. And the big shift that you instituted for me was that I found a huge difference was I was totally focused on protein intake, and you completely flipped the script, and we totally increased the carbohydrates, and I immediately noticed a difference in energy that I had in training, and immediately the weight started to drop off again. That's when it started to come off again.
Yeah, and for people who aren't familiar, Lane Norton is very physique focused, competition focused, weight loss focused, gym lifting focused. And so being really heavy protein centric, moderate carb is fairly common in his world. But like the phrase that we use the most often is calories will always drive the weight, but the macros will determine your performance and it will also determine your energy levels and whatnot. So, I think that it's like I wanted to highlight that because it's such a great lesson for so many people in terms of the differences between calories and macros and why people get stuck and plateau, what those changes are that they make, because it wasn't like most people would think, oh, well, we decreased carbohydrate intake, or, oh, I bet his performance dropped in spite of them trying to lose fat at the same time. And you had the opposite. I mean, you had a massive shift up in performance while seeing fat loss in the months leading up to Everest. And you are just a poster child for if someone is willing to invest the time in the details of tracking, not hard, but doesn't mean it's simple. But if they're willing to invest that, then the outcome that it is that they want is there, right? And you could make the argument that if the outcome is that important, the minuscule investment of punching a couple of things in an app temporarily to get what you want is worth that swap. And so I just, knowing the work that we did, I wanted to applaud you because you were so focused on it. You were so focused on it. And I just remember thinking in our check-ins, like, if there was ever a guy that's got it in him to summit, it's Michael. And you can see that because it's the same, in a world where podcasts are so focused on mental discipline and all these tough guy challenges. It is doing the things that you don't want to do that cues or initiates mental toughness or mental tenacity or whatever you want to call it. We think about that with brutal workouts, or we think about that with ice baths and cold challenges. It's as simple as tracking when you don't feel like it, rolling out of bed and going to do the workout, regardless of what the workout is, when you feel like staying in bed. I mean, it's those things and coercing yourself through really uncomfortable things that you don't want to do that really builds that. And so when I saw you doing those seemingly little things, I knew that it was in you, to go at least attempt whatever Everest would have to throw at you. And so, yeah, I thought that was a great thing for us to cover. So appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So you accomplished all of this prior to Everest. You're getting ready to go. Tell me kind of what you're thinking, what you're feeling just in the weeks leading into going up there.
So I guess the weeks leading up to it were so busy and so much prep and so much planning and so much detail. It almost became pretty overwhelming, to be completely honest with you. I remember I spoke to you. I said I was, the last 2 weeks, I was just overwhelmed with so much stuff to get ready and mentally getting my head in the space it needed to be, that I did stop tracking the last 3 weeks. And I just kind of wanted to focus on that. But again, as it was the whole way through, I honestly don't know when I left to go to Everest that I honestly thought anywhere in my body that I was actually going to do it. I think the only person that was 100% confident that I was going to do it was my wife and probably yourself. I was so nervous, and the trip that I had taken previous to this in 2024 wasn't successful. I didn't summit, which is very normal. I mean, it was a weather issue and whatnot, but it's still, I had that doubt in my mind. And I just wasn't sure that I had it in me to go to the biggest mountain in the world and succeed. I knew I was going to do it. I knew I was going to go there, and I knew I was going to put everything I possibly could into it. And I was so focused. And the first 2 weeks of the trip over there was like a family adventure. My wife and daughter trekked with me. So I think that really helped my first 2 weeks. I was able to focus on the family time, and we had a lot of fun together. And so I think those 2 weeks allowed me to kind of settle into the trip a little bit and get my mind ready. And once my wife and daughter left, then it became all business.
Maybe I want to even back up a little bit more, because there were two things that happened prior to you even leaving that could have really derailed things for you, right? And so I want to talk about kind of the iterations of us, you really working so hard to develop a plan on the mountain that would work for you. I want to visit that, but I also want to go back to January, February timeframe where you were crushing your training. Things looked like they had just this linear trajectory up, and like nothing could stop you from being as prepared as you could be to get to the mountain. And then you had you live in Canada, so obviously that's a very snowy, icy part of the year. You had a little bit of a setback. Can you talk a little bit about that and obviously describe the situation, but also talk about what you used or thought about, or, just some tactics, I guess, that you use mentally to get through that to the point of where it didn't derail you?
Sure. So yeah, I had a little bit of a freak accident I guess it was mid-January. I was out for a training hike and I left my house and I had about an hour walk to the trailhead. So while I was walking, I had my trekking pole and my crampons in my backpack as I was on the side of the road. But once I got to the trailhead, I got set my pack down and I was getting ready to head out on the trail. So I laid my pack down and I was get my crampons on. I stepped off the side of the trail for a quick second. When I stepped back on the trail, I stepped on the side of a log that was kind of on the side of a set of stairs, and I slipped. And my whole 2 feet came right out from under me, and my face landed on my backpack, but my trekking pole was stuck straight up in the side pouch of my backpack. So I stabbed myself right under my eye bone, the bone right here, my orbital bone, and I stabbed myself with the trekking pole. It went in so far, I had to take two hands and pull the trekking pole out of my face. And needless to say, there was quite a bit of blood, and I was immediately, instantaneously, my mind went to, oh my gosh, I can't go to Everest. And I was freaked out. My phone was in my pocket. Luckily, I was at the trailhead, so I still had cell service. So I brought my phone out to call my wife to come get me. And there was so much blood that I couldn't do the face recognition because the whole phone kept being covered in blood. So I'd wipe the blood off the phone and then I put it back. And so finally I got the bleeding under control and I was able to call my wife and she came and got me and I was at the hospital within an hour. So I broke a bone in my face. I actually broke the bone and I punctured my sinuses. So I spent the day in hospital and that evening, late in that evening, the doctor told me about the broken bone and the sinuses, and the thought started to creep in that maybe I can't go to Everest. Luckily, it wasn't a leg or an arm or something like that. But the next day was all rest, and I saw a plastic surgeon a couple of days after that, and he told me that it was okay for me to exercise. So immediately then I got a little bit of a glimpse there. And I think 4 days after the accident, I was back on the treadmill. And I was back for training pretty quickly, I got to say. At the time, I was very freaked out. But the biggest thing mentally, I started to have almost a little bit of PTSD, I guess, whenever I would think about the fall and I would feel it and my whole body would clench and would distress. So I had to really focus on not letting that happen because it was really hard mentally to get over that. But I got to say that within 2 weeks to 3 weeks, I was training full on that again. So it was hard at the beginning because I really thought I had done something pretty serious that I wasn't going to be able to do it. But I got back at it pretty quick.
Yeah, what I remember most about that was you sent me an email sort of describing what had happened, and like one of the things that I initially thought was, as much as I've been outside, as many trips as I've been on by myself or with other people, I have never heard of this happening to someone. And I immediately, like in that same moment, thought, I can't believe I've never heard of this ever happening. Because as sharp as those are, and as incongruent as the ground is, like with concrete that we're normally used to working on or walking on, you would think that you hear stuff like this all the time. It was just this freak accident.
It was
Now,
just so freaked the way I fell, and I just fell so perfectly. Now the good thing is that the way I landed, it was straight down on my orbital bone. If it had been 1 inch higher, it would have went right through my eyeball. or if it had been 2 inches lower, it would have went right to my neck. So it
Yeah.
could have been a lot worse than it was.
The second thing that I remember was you said, hey, this might derail my training a little bit, but I'm not going to let it get me down. You,
Yeah.
you might even wrote me in the hospital because I remember if I remember, it had been hours, may have been like the next morning that you sent me the email and you said, is there anything I should adjust for my nutrition?
Yeah.
And I remember sending some sort of response to the tune of like, don't worry about that. Just heal up, recover. We'll figure that part out later. Send me a message in a couple of days because you had said you were meeting with the surgeon and you would know whether or not you needed
Sure.
surgery or whether you could exercise or what it was. And yeah, man, sure enough, you sent me an email a couple of days later. He said, I'm good to go. I'm going to start easing back into it. I thought, oh my gosh. Okay. So yeah, you did. You eased right back into the same volume. And that was like obviously that took priority over anything else. But it was around that time that we really started to try to do enough revisions to your on mountain nutrition, where we were playing with stuff enough that we could put together a plan that, would then translate into what you were planning to do on Everest. So a couple of questions I think that would be cool to visit here is, you went to Nepal on one trek. You sort of like what led us to go down the path that we went down was really because of all of the pitfalls you had on that trip.
It
So
was.
if we could start by having you kind of, recount that trip, what it was that you took, what it was that you noticed, and then we can kind of talk about, you know, a couple of things that we tried to pay attention to in planning for this one, what it was that we used, and then, how it did for training, and then we'll get into the actual trip.
Sure. So on that trip, I was on Manaslu, and the first big thing that I really noticed having an issue with was the breakfasts. The at base camp was fine when we had our dining tent and whatnot. That wasn't a big deal. But when it was up on the mountain in the tent, I relied heavily on just Quaker oatmeal. That was my go-to for breakfast. And I had 2 days, I believe, where we were moving up the mountain, and I just crashed. I didn't have the energy. I didn't feel good. I turned back, and it was just a really, really bad feeling. I was almost like weak and almost a little lightheaded and whatnot. And you had even mentioned that not only was the breakfast not sufficient, but I was probably still recovering from the whole day before. So that at that trip, my whole nutrition plan, well, it wasn't really much of a plan at that time, was Quaker oatmeal for breakfast, and it was a few chocolate bars during the day on the trail, and it was dehydrated meals for supper. And I really, really felt that I didn't have the energy I needed to do. I look back on that trip right now and I'm like, I struggled on sections that were like a cakewalk compared to what I did on Everest. It wasn't even in the same realm. I think if I were to ever go back to that mountain now, it'd be easy compared to what, and at that time I thought it was incredibly difficult compared to what I just did on Everest. But the first thing me and you really worked on was the breakfasts. And that was when the muffins and that all came into play. And that was a huge, well, we can talk about that a little bit more. I use those even more than I think even you are aware at this point. But that was a huge improvement. And then what we did before I met up with you, I wouldn't practice eating, say, the gels or even the bars or anything on my training hikes at home because I was afraid to mess with my numbers. I didn't want to go crazy over my calories that day, even though I was out on the trail hiking for 8 hours. So that was the one big thing you changed. And you said, well, on the training days, we added, I believe it was 250 calories for every 2 hours I was on the trail. So then I was all of a sudden, we were trying out the gels and whatnot, and I was eating a lot more on the trail. And all of a sudden I had a lot more energy. And I noticed that big change just on the trails here locally. That made a huge difference when we got up on the mountain on Everest. It was huge.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's such a great example of trying stuff when you're here because, to put yourself in a position to physically do something more challenging, your training has to go well. So if you're depleting your fuel stores in an effort to lose weight prior to a trip, your training's not going to go well. I mean, you're kind of violating principle one at the expense of principle two. So Yeah, that was a big one. And what we, looking back at that plan as you kind of outlined what it was that you did on the first trip, the thing that we pulled out of that the most was it simply wasn't enough. It wasn't enough total fuel. It wasn't enough total carbohydrates. It wasn't frequent enough. There wasn't enough meals at regular intervals to keep you fueled. And so that's what we worked to change. And, I think sometimes we think that there's this perfect food or plan. There's not really. I mean, if you get the general idea of I need to be taking something in with regularity and it needs to be in a large enough dose to make a difference in my fueling and how I feel, what you plug in the space for what you're going to eat at those intervals could be as varied as there are options in a grocery store, and then the game becomes trying to figure out, well, what sounds good to you, what's going to sit well on your stomach, what's going to fuel you well, so on and so forth. And so, yeah, we started trying to make a plan with that. I think you can jump in here if you think if you think different or if you have a thought here, but one of the greatest challenges that we were trying to figure out is that we knew that we could find some fuel sources for you from Kathmandu to base camp to so on and so forth. The greatest challenge we didn't know is what happens when you get up high and all that stuff starts to freeze, right? So not just trying to think of fuel sources that would have minimal freezing, but also logistics, trying to get that stuff up there, right? And logistics to prevent it from freezing. And so, yeah, working through some of that stuff it's fun, but it can be stressful. And again, a lot of whether it's fun or stressful has to do with the person. And you were open-minded, willing to go to the drawing board, every week, and did an awesome job doing that.
Thank you. I got to say the muffins were critical. They were just so good. And so the recipe you gave me, I tweaked it a little bit, and then I made, I believe it was roughly 45 muffins, and I vacuum sealed them, and I brought them obviously up with me. And one thing I found was the dehydrated meals, they don't take, they, what is it? You need to double the cook time for every 5,000 feet, sorry, of elevation. So I was in the tent the first few nights when we were up high, and it was just taking forever. It just weren't. So I even started going with the muffins at supper time. So what I noticed that the dehydrated meals, they were only like 600 calories per serving, but the muffins I had in packs of two, they were almost 600 calories per muffin, the way I had them all made out. So I end up using them a lot, especially on the summit push. The last 3 days, I ate those almost primarily in the tent for breakfast and supper. And then obviously the gels were just critical.
Yeah, so I will post a link in the show notes for people that are wondering about what the muffins are, but they are really calorie dense. It's an easy way to get protein in because you can add some protein powder to the mix, so it's a great carrier for protein without you having to feel like you're, choking down just powder straight or what have you. But we met earlier this week, and I intentionally did not ask you anything about this. And so I personally am just like chomping at the bit to get a trip recap. And, having had been on trips before and been asked that question myself on podcasts, I know like your brain goes a million different directions when you ask for a trip recap. But I would love to kind of break it into parts. The first part, which you kind of highlighted, that you trekked with your wife and your daughter, and then they leave.
Yeah.
So part one, I think would be cool to have you kind of recap what happened from the point they left until the point that you sent me a message about halfway through, right? And so halfway through, for listeners who obviously don't know this, you send me a message, you're back in Kathmandu, and you're kind of going through how things have gone to this point, just sending me an update, which I thought was awesome. I appreciate you doing that. But kind of talk about that first, couple of weeks prior to any type of summit bid. You're hiking high and camping and trying to continue to acclimate yourself. Kind of talk about that first chunk.
Sure. So again, real quick, like I said, the first 2.5 weeks was the trek with my wife and daughter. That was phenomenal. It was an awful lot of fun, and I thought it was fantastic acclimatization because it was a little extra slow, which is great. And I felt when I arrived at base camp, I felt phenomenal. I got to say, I was super happy with where I was. So that's phase one. Phase two would be rotations, is how I would describe it. And when we arrived at base camp, immediately my guide, so within 2 days of arriving at base camp, we were hiking to a local peak called Pomori. We would hike up to high camp. We'd go up there. We'd sit for an hour at roughly 5,800 meters. We'd sit down, have some lunch, and come on back down. Just again, climb high, sleep low principle, which is obviously critical to the acclimatization process. And then we would spend one day hiking. We'd spend the next day training in the ice fall. It's just in the lower sections. We'd work on the ladders, the ropes, just walking. We'd just spend 2 or 3 hours walking up and down over the ice cliffs, just training again, getting used to the big boots and the crampons and whatnot. And then it came time to do our first rotation. So the original plan called for us to do 2 rotations up the mountain. We would go from base camp to camp 1. Then the next day have lunch at camp 2, come back to camp 1, down to base camp. But this season on Everest was marred with a lot of high winds and weather and whatnot. So we were delayed. We had to stay at base camp a little bit extra longer than we had anticipated. So what we decided to do was we changed our plan. And instead of doing 2 rotations that are a bit shorter, we went for 1 long rotation. So we left and we headed up through the ice fall, which was an absolutely crazy, wild experience in and of itself, just getting through that section of the climb. We would go through late at night. We would sleep from, say, 6 p.m. till probably midnight. We'd have breakfast at midnight, and we'd try and start climbing by 1 a.m. And we would normally arrive at camp 1, say, at around 6 a.m. in the morning. And then we sit there all day and relax. So we went from base camp to camp 1, and we spent the night. The next day we went to camp 2 and had lunch, and then came back down and spent another night at camp 1. And then the next day we moved up to camp 2, and we spent almost a week at camp 2. And camp 2 is at about 63 or 6,400 meters. And this was kind of the downfall a little bit of that extended period of time, which wasn't in the original plan. At 6,300 meters, I started to notice 2 days in that my appetite started to go. And my sleep, the first 2 nights at camp 2, I didn't sleep. Not a minute. I was wide awake. It's very, very common. Everybody struggles to sleep, but because we were doing an extended period of time up there, I found that I really started to decline. So when I first started the training section of the hikes at base camp, I felt incredible. 2 weeks later, at camp 2, I started to really feel drained. I wasn't sick. I was very, very lucky in that regard. I didn't get sick. There's a lot of people that did, but I felt really, really just drained of being up that high. So at one point, then the next big milestone for us was we had to tag camp 3. We had to just get up and visit camp 3 and come right back down. And I didn't make it. I wasn't feeling great. I was really run down. And then that meant I had to spend another night at camp 2 because I couldn't go back down to base camp until I got at least close to camp 3, or they wouldn't deem my rotation to count, and I would kind of be back to 0 again. So I stuck it out for another night then at camp 2. And we went probably 3/4 of the way to camp 3. And my guide determined that, okay, this was good enough. And he would deem that to be my rotation done. And at that point, even maybe a few days before that, I had planned that because I was feeling so drained, I said I was going to do a fallback. That again, I had no intentions of doing a fallback originally. A couple of people had talked about it, but I felt so drained. I knew that just going down to base camp and resting for a few days wasn't going to be enough.
So can you, for people who don't know what that is, can you describe what a fallback means?
Sure. There's a really famous mountaineer, I forget the name, or forget who it was that said it originally, but they say once you tag camp 3, then you touch grass. you're ready to go to the summit. So a lot of people, what they'll do is after they finish their rotation, while they're waiting for a weather window, they'll go back down. Some will go down one or two villages lower. Some will go all the way back down to Kathmandu. And I made the decision. I knew at that point that the way my body was feeling, that I had to go back down to Kathmandu. So when I finished, we almost had Camp 3. We came back as far as Camp 2 and slept. And early the next morning, we made our way to base camp. That afternoon, I arranged for a helicopter to take me to Kathmandu, and I spent 3 nights there. Within a couple of hours of landing in Kathmandu, I was like ravenously hungry because my appetite had really taken a hit over the last couple of days leading up to that. And so I spent 3 days in Kathmandu eating, sleeping, and I got a massage 2 days in a row. And when it came time 3 days later to go back, I felt like a whole new person. I really credit those 3 days, that little bit of a reset. Just three days really gave me the strength. My appetite came roaring back. I had so much more energy, and that really, really, really helped me for that last 2 week or week and a half push. 10 days.
Do you think that the way that you were feeling when you were trying to make that push to Camp 3 was the byproduct of all the accumulative days, or do you think it was environmental because of altitude, appetite suppression, no sleep? Was it both? What do you
I think
chalk it up to?
I chalked it up more to appetite suppression and lack of sleep, and as a big part of it. Up at Camp 2, they have a dining tent, but it's much more primitive than, say, down at base camp. So I still wasn't eating what I probably should have been eating. Like I say, my appetite was low. I was still eating, using gels and whatnot, but I believe it was a combination of a lot of it. You know what I mean? At that point, I had been there almost 4 weeks, over 4 weeks. So it still had been long, but the 3 days in Kathmandu were so beneficial. It really, really, really set me up for success.
So if you go back to Kathmandu, that's when you sent me a message and you kind of relayed the same information. So I want to ask then, like, next steps, right? Because you leave Kathmandu, you make your way back to Everest. I want to kind of talk through what that looks like, how everything went there. So when you get back to Kathmandu, for those 3 days, what's the most memorable thing that you ate while you're there?
The very first meal I had that evening, there's a little Italian restaurant in the hotel that we stay at there, the Hyatt in Kathmandu. And it was funny enough, my wife and daughter had been there 2 weeks prior, and they recommended this penne pasta dish. And I had my heart set on a spicy chicken pizza, so I ordered both of it.
That's great. Did you eat them both all the way through?
I sent all my friends and family a picture of both of them on my plate, and 10 minutes later, I sent them a picture of two empty plates.
That's great.
Both of them. It was so good. And
Oh, that's awesome.
the second night, I just went to the buffet, but that was the second night. The third night, my last night in Kathmandu before I went back, I did the exact same thing again. I had the exact same 2 meals, and it was phenomenal. I even had a big chocolate cake dessert at the afterwards, and
Yeah,
it was really good.
that's excellent. Yeah, so we knew that there was a very high probability that your appetite would leave you at some point, and
Absolutely.
we did, and you can develop a game plan for that to the best of your ability, but at the same time, you're subject to what you can get down, and like Mike Tyson famously says, and this happens a lot in nutrition, everybody's got a plan until they get in the ring and get punched in the face, and it's the same deal. It's like you can have a great plan, you can try to execute it, but sometimes that execution doesn't always go well. So, when you texted me from there and like you didn't have any apprehension about going back, you were just very matter of fact about being there to recover, and then you were going back to the mountain. So you go there, you basically put the Hyatt out of business with their pizza and penne, and then you start going back. So talk about kind of this second leg now where you've been in Kathmandu 3 days, you've had the opportunity to, basically regenerate yourself in terms of getting a couple of massages, some rest, some food, and now you're headed back. What's the second leg of this look like?
So the way it worked was it was actually very, very abrupt. The plan was to go back after 3 days and then rest at base camp, because at that point it was all weather dependent. With our expedition leader, the owner of the company, he actually was in Kathmandu with me. He was on business for those couple of days, and so he flew to Kathmandu with me. And so he was just monitoring the weather. So I had breakfast with him my last day in Kathmandu, and he said that he had just got his weather report and there was a weather window about to open up in a few days, but we had to fly back to base camp the next morning and leave for Camp 1 that night for the summit push. So it really came out of nowhere. And so I sat down with my guide and we had a long discussion and I spoke to my wife. I called her and we all made the decision that this very first early weather window was a good idea because we could capitalize on the 3 days in Kathmandu. I figured if I went back and I spent a week and a half to 10 days at base camp, all of a sudden it's only going to be the slow decline back down to where I was before. And as soon as he said that he had the opportunity for me to go in the early weather window, I thought it was a no-brainer. And I said, absolutely. Like, again, after discussion with my guide, I wanted to make sure he was okay with going early. And I wanted to make sure my wife was okay. But it just made total sense to capitalize on the good feeling and the strength that I had gained in Kathmandu.
100%. And even thinking about like, man, you sit in camp for 7 to 10 days and your mind starts screwing with you. It's just
Right.
better. It's almost better to just be thrown in the whirlwind, right? Throw in, get off, just start hiking. And it's always that anticipation of pressing go that builds the most anxiety. And then once you press go, no matter how nervous you are about something, people tend to do really well with whatever is thrown at them, but it's all the anxiety of and the what ifs ahead of time. So if you can get that out and just get out of the helicopter and go, absolutely. So that's great. That's good to hear.
Yes.
I
So the
didn't know that.
next morning, yeah, so the next morning, 5 a.m., we were on the helicopter. We were back in base camp by about 10 a.m. that morning. And the plan was to start hiking at midnight that night. So I was immediately thrown into packing and I had to immediately plan out my nutrition because again, I had bags and bags of stuff at base camp, but then all that had to be organized out into the doses that I needed for the plan summit push. And within, less than 12 hours, just over 12 hours after landing in base camp, we left for the summit. So when you leave for your summit push, the typical process is you leave base camp, you go to Camp 1 for the night, you go to Camp 2, spend a night, then you go to Camp 3 and spend a night. And when you leave Camp 3, you go to Camp 4 where you rest for several hours. You don't get to spend a full night because you normally leave for the summit around 7 or 8 p.m., depending on the weather. So we followed that original protocol and we left base camp that night, the night I got back from Kathmandu. And I felt phenomenal going through the icefall that night. Felt very strong. I cut almost an hour off my previous time going up through. We got to Camp 1 and we rested. Like I say, you arrive at Camp 1 at 6 a.m. You have the entire day just sat in your tent. And at that point, you're just really dealing with the heat up there. It's kind of like a little bit of an oven. The next morning, we woke and we moved to Camp 2. That's not a really big day. It's only roughly 4 hours, depending on how the heat. So we arrived at Camp 2. Again, I was feeling great. And we arrived at Camp 2 to the news that we had to hit pause. The wind had picked up. So our plan was to summit on the early morning on the 13th. And we were immediately notified that the window on the 13th was closed. So we were back to hanging out at Camp 2, my favorite place. So we spent 3 nights where we planned one. We spent 3 at Camp 2. And that evening, I want to say the evening of the 13th, we were sat down and we had a large team meeting of all the other people that were headed up that night, supposed to head up that night. And they were told us they were going to know within the hour whether or not we were going up or we were going to turn around and go right back down to base camp because they didn't want everybody sitting at Camp 2 too long because they knew everyone would start to deteriorate. So that evening around 5 p.m., we got the word that the weather was improved enough and they gave us the go ahead to go up. So again, we were back to scrambling and packing up. And the next morning, we left at roughly 4 a.m. We left around 4 a.m. because you wanted to get ahead of the heat going up to the Western Cwm. and we left Camp 2 and headed to Camp 3. At this was the point when oxygen now came into play. So we started on the oxygen about halfway between Camp 2 and Camp 3. And the move from Camp 2 to 3 is pretty strenuous because you got this is where you start on the Lhotse face. It's about 60-degree slope, straight up sheer ice. So that took me about 6.5, 7 hours straight up when until I arrived at Camp 3. And at that point, this was the highest I'd ever been because I didn't get to tag Camp 3 during our rotation. So I was pretty happy with myself. I thought I was a little bit slower than the average pace, but was still feeling pretty good. I was still feeling pretty confident at that point. We spent a full night at Camp 3. At that point, then I really noticed the appetite at Camp 3. I didn't eat the dehydrated meals for supper. I hate my muffins, which I absolutely love, but I still struggled a little bit to get them in me, but I did. The next morning, again, I had muffins again. The next morning, we left at around, again, 4 a.m. To make the move from Camp 3 to Camp 4. This was a very, very, very difficult day for me. We started, like I say, around 4 a.m. and I want to say 3 hours in, I was almost ready to quit. I had a real bad moment and I really, really struggled. I hadn't slept great the night before. I wasn't feeling really good. It was really, really steep and it got in my head. So for the first 2 hours, it was very tough. At one point, I went to my guide and I had this flag that was signed by all the kids in my daughter's class. And I asked him to take it out of my pack because I was going to take a picture right there. And then that was going to be my high point. And he wouldn't let me. He took the flag out of my pack and he put it in his pocket. And he said, let's go a little bit more. So I went a little bit more. And then I stopped and I sent a text message to my wife. And I said, I don't think I have any more in me. I don't think I can go anymore. And she texted me back and just said, go a little bit more. Just go a little bit further. And so I did. It took me, we were supposed to arrive at Camp 4 at 10 a.m. in the morning. So we had most of the whole afternoon and evening to rest. I didn't arrive at Camp 4 till almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's how slow I did it. It was a very difficult day. To this day, I don't know how I did it, how I didn't turn around. But my guide kept pulling gels out of my backpack and feeding them to me. And I kept drinking water. And we had a lot of black tea, a lot of tea we were drinking along the way. And so we arrived at Camp 4 at 3. And for the last 2 hours before getting there, I kept trying to do the math in my head. I'm like, I don't think we only have a couple of hours and we have to leave. So the plan was to leave at 7:30 p.m. So instead of me having all morning and afternoon to rest, I had 4 hours before I had to leave to go to the summit. So in those 4 hours, I had a bowl of soup. I had a bit of noodle soup. Some of the Sherpas cooked, and I ate that. I ate my muffins again, and I ate a bunch of gels, and I just laid down and I closed my eyes for again, I texted my wife. I said, I'm going to try and sleep now, but I didn't actually sleep. I closed my eyes for about an hour, but I didn't fall asleep. And so around 7 o'clock came and it was time to get ready to go. And I'm like, well, there's no way in this world I could possibly summit. It's the thought of summiting is over now. It's like, I can't do it. I don't have the energy. I didn't sleep. I didn't have any rest time. It took me too long to get here. So what I did was I said, well, let's go for a little bit of a hike. Let's go and see how far I can get. And maybe we'll take a few pictures and we'll turn around and we'll come back. So we started out, we left Camp 4 at 7:30 p.m. And within the first hour, we went super slow. My guide was very smart. He started the pace really, really slow. And we stopped frequently for water and snacks. And I started to feel pretty good. I was like, I feel better than I thought I would. And I was in a line of people and I kept noticing that the people in front of me, they weren't getting away from me. They weren't taking off. The gap between me and the group ahead of us, it wasn't widening. So I was like, well, they're doing it. They're not going that much faster than I am. And then the mental part of it really took over. I started to, in total, it took me 11 hours, and almost like every 10 minutes or so, I had to play a different mental game with myself. So I would think, the people ahead of me, they're going to go up and they're going to summit and they're going to have these great stories and there's great celebrations. So if they're going to do it, why can't I do it? I've worked hard. You mean I've done this for 5 years. I've been at this for long enough. So why can't I go up there with them? And then I kept thinking, I started to think of all the people that were back home that were thinking and waiting and to hear about how I did. And I'm like, well, this person, they're going to be disappointed if they find out I didn't make it. And so it was one of the most incredible things for me personally I've ever done is the mental aspect of it. Because as surprising as it was, as how hard the day was before and how little rest I had, physically I was feeling pretty good. It was more mental. It was all mental at that point. So after about 5 hours of climbing, we made it to an area called the balcony. And this is always the first place where everyone stops. The route from 4 to the balcony is so steep. You can't just stop. There's certainly nowhere to sit down at all. So once we got there and we were able to sit down, and I had, again, more gels and more water, and we changed oxygen tanks, and I just got to sit down and just relax for like, it felt like 20 minutes. It might have been 5. And at that point, I kind of knew I might be able to do this. So we started up and we left the balcony, headed for the south summit. And at that point, it had been windy, but at that point, you break out onto what's called the southeast ridge of Everest. And the wind was howling. Afterwards, we found out that the wind was right on the cusp of what our guides determined was safe. It was very touch and go as to whether or not it was too windy. And there was just enough hard, icy snow blowing in the wind that I could feel the snow kind of cutting into my cheeks a little bit. Just the gap between my goggles and my oxygen mask. And I kind of felt like I was starting to get a little bit of frostbite. But we kept going, and it was very, very slow. But again, I kept saying to myself, I kept basing it on the fact that the people in front of me weren't pulling away. I wasn't going so slow that I was holding the people up behind me. And once we got up, once you could see what's called the South Summit, once I saw that, I was like, this is going to happen. I can do it. I got it in me. I can keep going. I always kept trying to do a check physically. I knew I was exhausted. I knew I was mentally drained. I knew that it was taking everything I had to go, but I also knew that I was safe. I knew that I had mental clarity. I wasn't into a point where the altitude was making me lose my focus or anything like that. I always knew that I was safe. And that's why I was able to just keep going. And I just kept thinking, I thought about every hike I had been on. I thought about every hour I spent in the gym. I thought about all the countless hours I was on the treadmill. I was like, I've done all of that. I got to do this last little bit. So once I could see the South Summit, and at this point, it's obviously still pitch black. And I knew at that point that I had a really, really good shot at doing it. So once I got up on top of the South Summit and the sun started to rise, and I could look across and I could see the Cornish Traverse, and I could see the Hillary Step, and I could see the summit, and then I got this. I knew at that point it was only a matter of time that I was going to be able to get to the summit, and that's when the emotion started to overcome. I felt so relieved. I couldn't believe that I had done it. So it's still at that point, it's still over another hour. So we had to climb from the South Summit down. You climb down to this little protected area and we change oxygen again. And from there, then you start on the traverse, which this Cornish Traverse and the Hillary Step, I've run this section through my mind 8 million times. I've watched every single YouTube video there is on it. But when I got there, it looked so different. It was so much more sketchy than I had thought it was going to be. certain sections is just enough wide enough to fit one boot, and then it's a mile drop off on either side. But I was so focused, and I felt at that point I was like, well, obviously I'm not stopping now, and I felt really, really good physically at that point. I was super focused on making sure everything was safe. Had both safeties that clipped in at the one time, and then once I got to the top of the Hillary step, and it was just then it's just a short snow walk to the top. I was just beside myself.
Yeah, what an awesome story. And, I mean, Everest, obviously, the tallest mountain in the world, but there's all of this lore with it. The Lhotse face, the Hillary Step, the summit, the south, the four camps, the base camp. Like, there's all of this stuff. And so, it's one thing to see the effort rewarded with achievement and summit, but to be passing these iconic places and like just I can just imagine what it's like being on there as you're stepping through that stuff and you're focused on the task itself and there's separation between the fact that this is the Hillary Step and this is just ground that I'm walking on, yet trying to process both of those at the same time. And man, what a testament to your guide to say, "Look, I'm not giving you this flag. I can see it in you. I know you've got it in you. I'm putting this thing in my pocket. Let's just go a little bit further." And that is a really good guide, a really, really good guide that would, not try to convince you we're going all the way, but just to say, let's not throw it in quite yet. Let's try to get up here a little bit. And that tells me that he had confidence and could see in you that you had it. Folks, those Sherpas are just another level, right? And they see so many people and they can tell, who's got it to get there and who probably doesn't. And, for listeners that maybe aren't familiar, Everest is just like this. It's just this unique situation where you've got a very small weather window in the whole year to avoid monsoon season to summit. And so it's not like you could just, let's just wait a few days. It's like, no, you've got a very, very narrow window or the whole deal is off. And so, yeah, it's what an awesome story. And I couldn't be more excited for you when you got back to cell service and you sent me the picture and told me this, kind of told me the story. Obviously you were still up there, so we didn't get a chat or anything, but I mean, I showed my wife. I was so excited. It's like a brother that had been there. I just knew how hard you'd worked and the trekking pole to the face issue and the hours of running iterations of nutrition plans and training. And oh man, just to see a success story come out of it was so awesome. And I was so excited for you. So congratulations again. I appreciate you
My,
coming on to share it and letting us be a part of it. Now, since you've been home, we've talked some more, and this is kind of the last thing that I'd like to cover with you, unless you've got other stuff too. One thing that you have always camped on that's been so memorable to me, and you said this even prior to you going, you said it again since you've been home, is you said, "What a shame it would be for me to summit a mountain like Everest and to gain all of my weight back." And you sort of said that in reference to, look, when I get back, give me some time to recover, but let's think about what the next step is. I mean, that phrase says a lot, but it also talks a lot about just you personally. So, for anybody that is listening, what advice would you have for someone who's kind of in that place where you might have been at 300 or maybe that place at 230 or maybe that guy that's on, looking at the Hillary Step and trying to fight through those mental battles? What advice would you have for someone who finds themselves in the same boat that you were in?
I heard somebody say this phrase. Gosh, I know I've heard it a bunch of different times, but I heard it again just a few days ago about finding your why. I was so unmotivated for so many years. I just couldn't get going. I eat well for 2 days and then I'd be back off track. But as soon as I found the right why, as soon as I found as soon as I found that one thing, the one goal that was big enough to make me do it, I was really able to really focus and make it work at that point. And even though I knew it was a long goal, it was 5 years, but it was still broken up in little segments. Even before I went on the first trip, I still wanted to be able to run 5K or just to be able to lift or do so many push-ups. Just a whole bunch of small little tiny goals that all add up into one great big goal. But finding the why was the biggest thing for me. Was back when I was so motivated and I so loved soccer, I was able to do a lot of things I needed to do for that because I loved it so much. But in the whole period between soccer and Everest, I couldn't find that. It wasn't enough for me to just, I guess, vanity wasn't, just because I didn't like the way I looked or the way I felt, it wasn't enough. But once I found the right why, that was it. And that's exactly what I'm at right now. I'm still trying to find my next why. And I since me and you spoke a few days ago, I was out for a run yesterday. I ran again today. I've done a hike now the last few days, and just 3 or 4 days of exercising again, I feel what am I going to exercise? What am I going to do tomorrow? So I think I might have gotten to the point now where I don't want to just give up the exercising. So now I haven't honed the diet back in yet, and I don't know. I'm sure I'll be ready to soon enough, but at the moment I'm not ready to start tracking in my fitness ballet. But yesterday I put a few things in there, and then maybe so. I think the next 2 weeks I will be ready to do that because I did work so hard, and I am so happy with how far I came that it would be a shame to let I'll go again.
Yeah, and then you made the tail, like the nail in the coffin remark that nearly everyone I know who loves big mountain stuff makes, which is, yeah, I'm proud of what I've done, and I'll probably never do it again, which means you will definitely be doing something like this again at some point. So, thank you so much
Yeah,
for.
yeah. My wife is reluctantly came to Everest Base Camp, but she's already researching Kilimanjaro. So the trek had a profound effect on her as well. And so we're already talking about some family treks that we're going to do, and who knows where that'll lead down the road. But at the moment, I'm firmly in the camp of no more climbing, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on, sharing the story, and I appreciate your time. Congrats again. It's an awesome story. And, like you've shared with me a little bit that you've had the opportunity to speak to some kids and stuff at your school. And it's stories like yours that always, they serve as the catalyst for change for people. And so I think it's powerful when we share them. So thanks for coming on and doing it.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me. And just one really quick thing. I had a student tell me I met with a grade 4 class a few days ago, and one of the kids stepped up and put up his hand and said, "You know what? I'm going to climb Mount Everest one day too," and that made it all worth it.
Big thank you to Michael for coming on the podcast and sharing all of that. I told him this, and I've shared this before on here. I think one of the greatest regrets that I have in not doing this, or one of the greatest regrets I have since we started doing this, is not having more people on to share their stories. I've always shied away from it because I didn't, to be transparent, I didn't know how to do it without it sounding like some Valley to Peak infomercial, and that wasn't the goal. I didn't want to exploit them, but started to realize that, I was taking an opportunity from them. So hopefully you guys enjoy them, because there will be more of these as time goes on. And obviously we've got a ton of other podcast episodes that will be coming out as well. A recipe that he referenced so many times is one that you guys are probably familiar with if you've listened for any length of time. It's the Audrey bars, as well as the other backcountry bar that I took on the sheep hunt and that Mark kind of originally came up with. And so I'll link those in the show notes, and you can check those out if you've not already looked at them. And any other links that, came from references that Michael made or that I had made will be in there as well. We will be back again in another couple of weeks with more episodes. But like I said in the introduction, if you ever have any questions that you want us to cover in here, you can send those over to us at info@v2pnutrition.com. There haven't been as many of those lately because honestly, Lindsay's been slammed as we've been moving, but we are moved. So we can start covering some more of those, and we're looking forward to it. But if you have some questions on topics that we've not covered or have covered and you want, covered again, whatever, send those to us at info@v2pnutrition.com, and we would be more than happy to cover them. Have a great week, everyone. We will be back again in another couple of weeks with more episodes.